gaining distribution for that brand, you face this chicken and egg scenario of you call up a retailer and you say, "Hey, Ms. or Mr. Retailer, I'd like to get into your stores. Here's what my brand is," and they're like, "Great, who's your distributor?" And then you're like, "I don't have one." And so you call the distributor, and you're like, "Hey, I'd like to get into the state," and they're like, "Okay, great. Which retailers do you have?" And so you kind of face this back and forth. Most brands started off with a self-distribution model, including some of the huge ones like Tito's, for example. The guy who started Tito's, his name is Tito Beverage, believe it or not. And he started off by selling the product out of the trunk of his car in Texas. By the way, everyone thinks that it came up overnight. Tito's has been 20 to 25 years in the making.
In terms of what has worked or not worked, some of the areas where people tend to fail or take a misstep with their brand that they're trying to launch.
Two things are really big. One is not having a good understanding of your core consumer and how to connect with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is something that we were discussing before, which is moving too fast to get too spread out.
So the last question I ask all of our guests, and I can't wait to hear your answer, but what has been your recipe to revenue? Hello, welcome back to Recipe to Revenue. I am here today with A.T. Howe, the owner and founder of Elevate Beverage. I'm super excited to have you here today with me, A.T. You have just such a phenomenal background in so many different areas of the industry, and I know you're going to share so much wisdom with us today. Why don't you start off a little bit, just introduction about yourself, and then we're going to dive into your career and all the different roles that you've had along the way and how that's led you to Elevate today.
Great. Thanks for having me, Leah. I appreciate it. I've had quite the varied background in terms of what I've done in my job history, but it all kind of revolves around food and hospitality in some way, shape, or form. So starting from my early years when I was in the restaurant industry, I managed at the House of Blues, and I managed at a restaurant called Legal Seafood, both in the Northeast. And then I moved into consumer products with Quaker Oats and PepsiCo, calling on big supermarket chains, selling them new items, developing their promotional programs, that sort of thing. And then I moved into the world of beer, wine, and spirits with Diageo, and spent some time working with restaurants and national chains, places like California Pizza Kitchen and Cheesecake Factory, and large chain restaurants out west here. So that's really what introduced me to the beer, wine, and spirits business, and it's been running ever since from there.
Yeah. What was it about the restaurant industry and food and beverage that originally got you interested and kind of kept you in the space?
Well, my initial job out of college was in finance, and I spent 8 hours a day at a desk, and I was working with spreadsheets, and it was, let me find a word for this. Oh yeah, boring.
That's the word.
That's the word I'm looking for. And so I was like, what can I do that's the complete opposite of this? And I had the opportunity to join the House of Blues almost at its inception, probably about a year in.
I don't think you can get too much different from finance to House of Blues. So good choice in expanding your horizons there.
It was crazy. And luckily in my first week, the sous chef, who's the assistant chef, took pity on me and showed me the ropes in the kitchen and got me through my first couple months of being back in the kitchen and just understanding how to prepare all the dishes and that sort of thing. And then once I worked in the business, it's just the hospitality industry is very addicting. You get to see people at their high points. The job was, we're going to give you the food, the booze, and the entertainment, and all you have to do is host a party 5 nights a week. okay, I guess I can
Yeah,
do
twist my
that.
arm.
Right. And the people I worked with were wonderful and
Hmm.
crazy, and it was an exciting time. And so that's what brought me to hospitality. And then
Yeah.
every other job has been like, how do I bring people together? How do I keep people social? How do we nourish people? How do we introduce them to new and interesting foods and cultures and all that? So it was kind of
Hmm.
just, one of the things that ties us together is food. The other thing that
Absolutely.
ties us together is fermentation.
Fermentation. Interesting.
Fermentation. Every culture takes something and they ferment it
uh,
into something
uh,
else.
yeah, starting
Um,
with mead back in the early days, right?
Mead or the equivalent of pickles or whatever it happens to
Mm,
be, every culture has fermentation
sure.
as their use for leftover agricultural goods. And so that
Hmm.
leads to, wine and beer, and eventually leads us to spirits.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Yeah. Analogy there. And I hadn't thought of the food side of fermentation, but an important part of our history, and
We
especially in the food and beverage space.
we can't have bread without it.
Right. Right.
So, like,
Absolutely.
or pizza or anything else like that.
Yeah. And where would we be as a civilization without those?
Lost and hungry.
Yeah. We should have just died out early on then.
Sure, sure.
Okay, so let's go to your early days back in Diageo. And so you were responsible for these national accounts and new products. How did you go about building those relationships and working with the on premise partners? And then how do you tie that into what you do today?
Sure. A lot of what I was doing there was introducing new products and developing placements on their menu. So,
Hmm.
luckily, a part of the job was developing new drink items with the help of some great people we had in the organization. And then I would bring that and promotional programming to the account and say, hey, what if we ran a program around this brand with this particular type of drink with this
Hmm.
programming to go along with
So
it.
fun.
And so it was that developing those programs that was a lot of fun and was what made it really engaging between myself and the retailer or the customer.
Hmm.
So one of my accounts was Disney, which was great.
Wow.
I don't think I've ever been in the front door of a Disney park
Yeah.
because I was always meeting with somebody, so we'd always go in the back.
Did,
Um,
did you get to go in the underground Disney tunnels at any point?
we got to go in the tunnels. I got to see people without their the Mickey head off to the
Yeah.
side, things like
Taking
that.
his coffee break.
Right, exactly. So it was really cool working with them and working with all the other customers that we had in terms of their programs, and it was great to come into the restaurant and actually see a drink that I had helped develop or worked on the programming, and
Hmm.
see that see people enjoying it, and that also harkened back to the days of the being in the restaurant industry, just
Sure.
seeing people enjoy themselves, and
Yeah,
you
just
know,
kind of on the other side of it,
yeah,
instead of the handing the drink over, kind of the
exactly.
creation part of it. Do you think in that type of space, what is more important to be successful there? Is it the creativity of crafting those new products, or is it the partnership that you're creating with the customer you're working with, or a combination?
The partnership is key. I
Hmm.
always prided myself on being super knowledgeable about the industry, about trends, about
Hmm.
what was going on in the business, about how to make the drinks,
Yeah.
what worked with what. So this particular spirit works with these mixers or works with these other products.
Hmm.
What works with something that's in season? Can we develop a seasonal menu or a seasonal recipe that's working with something that's in
Yeah.
season at the time? Those sorts of things were really important to driving that. But the
Hmm.
relationship with the person that I was working with was always key, and bringing them knowledge of the industry or knowledge of trends or knowledge of what might resonate with their consumer. And really, their consumer was key. It didn't matter what
Hmm.
I thought, it didn't matter you know, what we had to sell. It was, is this going to be a fit with your consumer? Am I serving your
Hmm.
needs as the restaurant, bar, what have you, and making sure that we were in that space and connected with them on that level.
Yeah. And what were some of the ways that you would try to understand who their consumers were and what their interests were?
Well, I'd see what they were doing as far as marketing goes in terms of who they
Mhm.
were marketing to, what they were trying to do, and then asking a ton of questions. I mean, just trying to
Mhm.
understand what they were doing, what promotions did their marketing department have coming up? What were they trying to promote?
Mhm.
What
It's
kind
a
of
lot of
food items?
collaboration.
Were they changing food menus in terms of adding items to their menu or adding a different line? Restaurants frequently add different product lines to stay relevant and keep
Mhm.
things changing and to mix things up. So, what sorts of things are you doing that I can tie into and making sure that whatever I was doing was really tying into whatever they had going on?
Yeah, yeah.
And not making things overly complicated also was key. Like from my
Uh-huh.
restaurant days, can your people execute this thing? Is critical.
Mhm.
And if you're not thinking about that, you're going to end up with something super complex that's not going to be done well. And then the people doing it are going to resent it. And, so you want to make it really easy for the person who's got to execute the thing every day.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
they can do it.
Yeah, you hear a lot of the stories of the, like, Starbucks baristas that just, like, curse the secret menu and
Exactly, exactly. How many pumps of what does this have?
Yeah.
Those kind. So you make it simple. You're like, it's a vanilla latte, 2 pumps. That's
Right.
it,
Yeah,
and,
keep it simple.
right.
So then you ended up in the tequila world,
I
and
did
so tell us about that
eventually.
transition.
Sure. I worked for in between Diageo and tequila, I worked for a custom label wine company, which really ties into what I did with my own company. But I
Okay.
guess we'll circle back on that a little bit. But
Sure.
I ended up in tequila with a small company called Partita, which was based here in San Francisco. And I was working in the Northern California market, trying to build the brand
Mhm.
and working to increase distribution. It was the same sort of thing I was doing for Diageo, just on a much more local
Yeah.
scale.
Mhm.
So
Yeah. And so when you're working more on a local scale, what are some of the different dynamics that you experienced in getting that brand going?
you spend a lot more time. Well, since it was more startup than Diageo, I mean, Diageo, like Tanqueray is everywhere, for
Yeah.
example. So Diageo's products are just everywhere. It was a lot more new product introduction and trying to differentiate
Mhm.
against the other tequilas in the market as to what was relevant and what was interesting about that particular tequila,
Mhm.
and why someone should have it on their shelf beyond price points. You can
Mhm.
always sell to price point, but that's a race to the bottom. So what are we
Yeah.
doing as a company or as a brand from a marketing perspective? What are we doing to draw people in? What are we doing to if there are production differences, sometimes there are
Mhm.
production differences that make a difference. For example, people may have seen additive free tequila be a thing,
Mhm.
where it's illegal to add things to tequila like glycerin or extra sugar or things like that, but companies that don't do those sorts of things are held in higher regard. And
Right.
so it's that can be a point of differentiation as you're selling forward.
Mhm. Yeah, so really important to understand your competition and how you're positioning. That's what I'm hearing.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Definitely you need to understand your competition and understand how you fit in
Mhm.
the system, price point wise, consumer wise,
Mhm.
and certainly once again, how do you fit into that bar's program or that restaurant's program or that retailer's program in terms of, once again,
Mhm.
pricing and positioning and things like that. About 8 years ago, I started a brand called Base Note, which is a fruit infused wine brand,
Mhm.
and that was started from the beginning. I started it from absolutely from an idea
Mhm.
and a little bit of wine and some fruit and some herbs in my house, and moved it forward from there. But that was a huge learning experience and hugely challenging in terms of
Yeah.
pulling together all the experiences I had in the past and then bringing them to
Mhm.
bear with my own brand. Gaining distribution for that brand, you face this chicken and egg scenario of, you call up a retailer and you say, "Hey, Ms. or Mr. Retailer, I'd like to get
Yeah.
into your stores. Here's what my brand is," and they're like, "Great, who's your distributor?"
Yeah.
And then you're like, "I don't have one," and so you call the
Yeah.
distributor, and you're like, "Hey, I'd like to get into the state," and they're like, "Okay, great. Which retailers do you have?" And so you kind of face this
Yeah.
It's back and forth. So it
Yeah, this
was a
ping
lot
pong
of
game.
yeah. So it was a lot of developing initially the California market on my own in self
Mm-hmm.
distribution, just to have enough momentum and mass for the distributor to say, okay, we'll take you on.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key of getting into a distribution scenario, because the distributor
Yeah.
doesn't want product that they can't sell.
Right.
So they want to know that it's going somewhere initially. So whatever they take on initially, they want to make sure that, hey, I can sell this. I'm going to take on, you know, what it is that you say that you've got already in distribution, and then we can work on growing it from there. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's how you do it. And then if you're lucky enough to be in California or Texas or Florida or one of the other markets that's a chain driven market, you may
Mm-hmm.
be able to get a chain like Total Wine or Bevmo
Sure.
or Safeway to expand into another market. And so you then get Total Wine in another market, and you go into that other market and you get distribution and say, hey, I'm in these stores in this market. Can you help me
Right.
out with distribution? And at that point, they'll probably say yes.
Yeah.
But that's the challenge of getting that first one, is always really, really tough, because it's a lot of building and a lot of up and down the street work and a lot of running around delivering cases yourself.
Yeah.
Most brands started off with a self distribution model, including some of the huge ones like Tito's, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the guy who started Tito's, his name is Tito Beverage. Believe it or not, it's DGE.
Really?
Yeah, his last name is
Yeah.
Beverage.
Huh.
And he started off by selling the product out of the trunk of his car in Texas.
Yeah.
And so,
Huh. I didn't
it's
know that.
typically a but this was, by the way, everyone thinks that it came up overnight. Tito's has been 20 to 25 years in the
Yeah.
making. He started a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of
Yeah. One
hard
of those
work.
overnight successes,
Right.
right? In quotes.
A 20-year overnight success. Yes.
Yeah.
More like that. So
Yeah.
those kinds of things are really important to understand your home market, to really
Mm-hmm.
build on where you're local and you can pay attention to the retailers individually. Spend a lot of time developing your community in your home market.
Mm-hmm.
And those things really will pay dividends, allowing you to expand slowly and move out from your home market,
Yeah. Yeah.
or a
Excellent.
market.
Yeah.
If your home market isn't conducive, a market that you can spend a lot of
Mm-hmm.
time in.
So to that point, would you recommend, starting in a bigger market if you have the proximity to it, or in a middle tier market, you can get more penetration in, or any thoughts on that?
I would say pick a market that you're comfortable and familiar with, as
Mm-hmm.
far as the geography and
Mm-hmm.
and going to, because you're going to be there every day. like
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
just plan
Be
on
able
being
to
there
get
every
around.
day. So,
Yeah.
a 2 hour commute somewhere is kind of going to wear on you after a while. So I would
Sure.
say start as local as possible, get as well known as possible, spend
Yep.
as much time with your retailers and customers and consumers as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really how the growth happens, because you'll
Yep.
find things out you'll get good feedback if you're in there daily or weekly. You will understand
Mm-hmm.
what works and what doesn't work, and then you can apply that to other retailers. So as you move from
Right.
one to the next, you can say, oh, this worked really well here. Can I take it to the retailer down the road? Or this didn't work so well, or I
Mm-hmm.
need this promotional material that will help the consumer understand my product better. Those kinds of things, like,
Yeah.
shelf talkers, posters, things of that nature. Do I
Mm-hmm.
need that? Yes. Okay, I should develop it for everybody. Those
Yeah.
kinds of things.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Excellent.
start as small as possible and as local as possible, because
Mm-hmm.
the more you're well known in one space, the easier it is to expand.
Right, to get that sort of proof of concept going, and being able to say you're in certain retail, that really helps kind of get the wheels going there.
Yep,
So
absolutely.
I think some, emerging brands sometimes think, of course, it's leadership styles have a lot to do with it, but how fast they should be moving. They have an idea, they want to get it to market. What's the right pace to go through the process? Make sure you have a good product, that you have good packaging, marketing, and you're ready for retail. versus getting something out versus doing it right? Where's the right balance?
Well, the market's not going to be forgiving on not doing something well. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you in producing a product, you need to have good design. You need to have good, um, good tasting products.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you're going to get tried, and then people are going to say, "No, this tastes terrible," and never having
Mm-hmm.
this again. And so, you want to get repeat business. So your baseline, your product has to taste good, and it's got to look good and be, visually appealing. But beyond that, I would say you should move as slow as you possibly can, but sometimes that's not
Mm-hmm.
possible, if that makes sense. You're
Sure.
looking to get revenue in because you're trying to balance out, you know, bringing revenue in and making sales
Mm-hmm.
versus the rollout that you want to do. And so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you're trying to move faster than you should, but I would say as slow as you can and still making the money you need to make, I guess would
Yeah.
be.
Yeah.
And it's a
Okay. So
tough
so
balancing
slow
act.
but steady.
Slow but steady, and try to be as thoughtful as you can about where
Mm-hmm.
to go next. If you're in one market, can I'm in San Francisco, can I
Mm-hmm.
go to Oakland next? Is
Sure.
that, or can I go to Sacramento next, or can I go to the East Bay, down the San Jose, down that way,
Right.
next, versus going to Florida.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's very far. The logistics are challenging.
Yeah.
Your being there is going to be challenging unless you can hire someone to be in the market.
Mm-hmm.
No one sells whatever it is you're creating uh, better than you.
Yeah. Quite like you.
So you want to be as hands on as possible, and that means that you need to be nearby.
Yeah. Yeah. Good
So I
advice.
would say try to be as local as possible and move as slowly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when I say slowly, I just mean really saturate the area that you're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like everybody should know you. Everybody should know the product in your area.
Yeah.
Once you get beyond
Do
that,
not leave a retail store potential unturned in your area
right,
before moving on.
right, basically yes.
So
And that's tough
in
because
in
people who start
mhm,
companies, especially if they're doing it with somebody else's revenue, um, or someone else's money, are going to be under a
mhm,
lot of pressure to return the money as fast as possible.
right.
And that's where you run into expansion challenges of going out too fast and trying to be everywhere and not really getting
Mhm.
deep into the market.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's an excellent point too. Yeah, having that external pressure to perform before you've had a chance to really optimize all your success in one area, because it looks shinier and flashier to say, "Oh, we're in two states," versus, "Oh, I have 100% of this one market."
Right, right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But as an example, there's 40 million people in California. It's not
Yeah.
a bad place to start. I mean,
Yeah.
you
Sure.
can kind of make some good inroads here before you need to go anywhere else,
Right. Yeah.
um, and then move out beyond here.
So, in again, going back to thinking of that emerging brand type business, what is the best team to put together of advisors that you would recommend? To help you through to ensure that by the time you do start your retail process, that you're successful.
I have found in doing what I did, I didn't know as much about manufacturing.
Mm-hmm.
So, coming from a sales and marketing background, I did not know a ton about my manufacturing and formulation. So, you're
Yeah.
definitely if you don't have the manufacturing background, you're going to need some help sourcing materials to produce your product,
Mm-hmm.
actual production of your product,
Mm-hmm.
formulating your product, moving from what you do in the kitchen to what you do to put it in a bottle or in a can or in however you're going to sell it, is a totally different process. I mean, I can make a
Yeah.
gallon of fruit infused wine at home, But
Mhm.
when I wanted to make 10,000 gallons, that was a different process and
Sure.
took a different set of skills.
Yeah.
And so that's where you're definitely going to need to assess your own skill set and say, hey, where do I know a lot? And when you don't know a lot, go find some people who are a lot smarter than you to help you do that thing.
Sure.
Um, because they will be the cornerstone of what it is you're doing. You'll
Mhm.
also need people if you're not great at accounting. You will need accounting people. You will need design people. You will need
Mhm.
legal people.
Yeah.
It is it is quite the group that you will have to get together. And some folks you can get through contracting and consulting, and some folks you're
Mhm.
going to want to hire on
Yeah.
as members of your team. And
Right.
so that also, if you need to go raise money, if you are not good at raising money, you may need folks to help you do that.
Mhm.
If you are, and then there's the distribution portion of the program. You're
Yeah.
going to need someone who's familiar with the distribution system and understands how that works, and then how your retail channel works. If you are not familiar with your retail channel, let's say you're coming
Mhm.
from a legal background or a manufacturing background, but you don't understand the channel and how things are sold in, or where some of the hidden costs are, that's
Mhm.
where somebody who's done that job before will know how to deal with that.
Yeah.
And so all those things are important. The one thing that I knew
Mhm.
very little about was logistics, and how
Mhm.
much you spend a lot of time thinking about trucking, way more than you ever thought you
Yeah.
would in your life. Like, you think about
Uh-huh.
trucking and
Yeah.
how to get things from point A to point B, whether
Right.
it's permanently or
10,000 bottles are
temporarily.
not fitting in the back of your SUV, so to the
No,
truck
it's
it
going on a
is.
truck somewhere to somewhere else, or a
Mhm.
train, or something along those, or maybe even a ship. If you are
Mhm.
importing products, you may be
Yeah.
bringing it in on a ship. You're bringing in a bladder of wine, for example, in a cargo container
Mhm.
from Europe, or
Yeah.
Australia, or New Zealand, or South Africa. And so that's a whole nother range of things that you have to think about from a logistical background. And
Mhm.
I am currently working with a customer who wants to bring in a beer from Fiji. So,
Mm.
like,
Wow.
that's
That's
that's a
cool.
lot of that's a lot of
A lot of
logistics.
logistics.
That's a lot of logistics, and a lot of
Yeah.
paperwork, and a lot of licensing and things like that
Sure.
that you don't necessarily know about upfront.
Yeah.
So I would say that you want to find out as much about the industry that you're about to go into as you can, and
Mhm.
figure out where your knowledge gaps are,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah,
hire
that
out
makes
for
sense.
the knowledge gaps um,
Right.
from where you are. And that's finding someone who's done that job before, and kind of
Mhm.
paying them for some time to actually figure out where your
Yeah.
gaps are. You
Yeah,
know,
and expertise to get over the learning curve faster. So you can't go, you can only go as fast as you can go, but by bringing in different experts can help expedite
right?
your process quite a bit. So you touched upon a client, so that's a good segue to talk about Elevate Beverage and what you do today, because you've had all this experience out there with other companies and then with your own brand, and then you moved into the consulting role. So tell us how that transition came about.
Right. So the transition came because I'm selling the brand for the Base Note wine brand, and so
Hmm.
I needed to do something else because I'm not producing wine anymore. And
Yeah.
so I found that there were lots of folks out there with more ambition than experience, which is great. And it's good to have a dream, and it's good to have
Hmm.
something that you're passionate about and that you want to do, but you may not have the experience to do it. And so
Hmm.
I help folks in the pre-production phase of their business, which is, what product am I producing? How is it
Hmm.
formulated? How do we get it? Who do we go to for production? How do we source the materials to produce it?
Hmm.
That sort of thing. And then I work with them on post production. How do we get it? What's our strategy for getting it into the marketplace? Which retailers are we going to focus on? Who's your core consumer? Which
Hmm.
distributors can possibly help you get this to market? In which markets? What licensing do you need to actually deal with the product after it's been produced? And I really focus on beer, wine, and spirits typically, although I do dabble in non-alcoholic stuff,
Hmm.
primarily in beverage. And so frequently enough, you will need some kind of license to take possession of
Yeah.
whatever it is you just made. And so you need those licenses. My typical question for folks is, do you know where UPC codes come from?
Mhm.
And if the answer is no, then they
Yeah.
probably need help
Sure.
in terms of, they just have that gap around production and knowledge of
Yeah.
the industry. And it's like, hey, how can I help you get your product on the shelf and get
Yeah.
your dream started? And so that's the building portion of the program, is like, how do we get them to
Mhm.
building out the product and getting it done?
Yeah.
And
So what
so
stage are you finding most of your clients come to you at? Are they in the pre-production stage, or are they kind of in the middle, ready to go to production, and they're at that point they're ready for help? Or are they still the idea stage and they are looking for that expert to help guide them through the whole process?
they're usually in the pre-production stage of, I have an idea of a product I want to produce, and they
Mm-hmm.
may or may not have design
Mm-hmm.
um, and a final and a package on that, but they kind of know that they
Mm-hmm.
want to produce a certain kind of beverage. And
Yeah.
so that's kind of where I get them first. I also get people in the, we've produced this beverage, but we're kind of stuck on how to get it into the marketplace more effectively.
Yeah.
And that's the other half of the business, is like, okay, how do we really, get you to resonate with your core consumer and get you to
Mm-hmm.
resonate with retailers that are going to be appropriate for your brand? And so on that level, that's the other half of the business where I find myself
Mm-hmm.
helping customers out.
Yeah.
Um, but it definitely in the pre-production phase is a lot of it. And how do I get this done?
Yeah.
Is
Are
a
you
lot of it.
finding, are these first time food and beverage founders, or they have done this before? Are they entrepreneurial, or are they coming from the
Folks who
industry but a different, maybe like you did, coming from
No, I
in the
find that there are
marketing
people who
space?
are entrepreneurial who don't have experience in this particular field
Mm-hmm.
and need
Okay.
help and haven't produced something.
Yeah.
Once you've tackled the production of anything, you're kind of like, okay, I get it. I know how I'm going. I can kind of talk to a producer and say, a co-packer or a producer, and say,
Mm-hmm.
here's what I want to do, and they'll find it easy to work with you because you're talking the same language.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when they
Right.
when they get people who are new, they're like, you haven't done this yet, have you?
Yeah.
So this is going to require
Yeah.
a little
You're
more
like,
work.
you go into the newbie category.
Right. Which is
Yeah.
fine. Don't get
Yeah.
me wrong. We don't get
Yeah.
new stuff unless someone's sitting around thinking about, a great thing that they could do
True.
potentially, which is fabulous. And we want to see new
Yeah.
stuff, because big companies aren't good at new. They're good at
Yeah.
producing the same thing all the time. So you need people
Right.
coming up with new ideas and new
Mm-hmm.
things, and that's great. And
Yeah.
how can I help them get to, actually producing that thing and selling that thing and creating a market for that thing? And that's
Mm-hmm.
that's the exciting part, because definitely every time I pick up a new project, it's not the same
Mm-hmm.
product that I was just working with before. So it's
Right.
a different set of challenges, and it's a different set of of uh of issues that you have to deal with
Mm-hmm.
in terms of getting that. So that's what keeps me engaged in a big way, in terms of like, okay,
Yeah.
this is a new project, this is different, cool, we get to do something else.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So
What
that's
have
the
you
exciting part.
seen in terms of what has worked or not worked? Some of the areas where people tend to fail or take a misstep with their brand that they're trying to launch.
um Two things are really big. One is not having a good understanding of your core consumer and how to connect with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is something that we were discussing before, which is moving too fast to
Mm-hmm.
get too spread out.
Yeah.
And they kind of tie together, because if you spend a lot of time in the same community, working in that community and talking to your core consumer about your brand, then
Mm-hmm.
you will get good recognition, and you will have those consumers talking to their friends and talking
Mm-hmm.
on social media um, and talking to retailers about your brand. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really something that needs to be developed for all, especially small brands. you can't go and just advertise on television because, or, old legacy media, because
Yeah.
you'll hit a lot of the wrong people and a few of the right people. And so you
Sure.
really want to focus on the right people and where they're hanging out and
Mm-hmm.
where you can engage with them. And when I say the right people, I'm talking about people who are interested in your stuff, whatever your stuff
Mm-hmm.
is,
Yeah.
and however it connects to them, and however the thing that you're producing integrates into their life and makes them feel good or feel some type of way.
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Right.
Whether it makes them feel good or it makes them feel inspired or it makes them feel awake or it makes them whatever it makes them
Mm-hmm.
feel,
Yeah.
you want to make sure that you're doing that. If you have an energy brand, you want to be at high energy spaces, an energy
Sure.
drink brand, high energy spaces. If you have a product that's marketed towards people who knit, you want to be at all the knitting conventions because,
Sure.
like
Yeah.
otherwise you're not, and I'm using knitting as just an arbitrary thing,
Yeah.
but it's
As
that kind of
opposite to an energy drink, right?
right.
calm,
Exact.
calm
Well,
versus
yes,
energy.
calm. Yes, exactly. Calm, relaxing. Maybe a soothing beverage. Maybe some chamomile tea.
Yeah.
If that's your play.
Yeah.
So on that level, you definitely want to do those things and make sure that you're really connecting with your consumer. And I think,
Yeah.
and that's where we see the downfall of a lot of brands is they go out, it's a
Mm-hmm.
generic brand, it has no consumer connection, and it gets lost in the sea of other brands that are already established.
Mm-hmm.
And so no one has a drive to go and get your thing versus the standard thing. This is how,
Right.
this is how Josh Sellers sells wine,
Mm-hmm.
because it's the default thing that's in the store, and
Yeah.
no one's made a case as to why their wine is substantially better,
Yeah. Yeah.
or it has a connection because you've been to the vineyard and you saw how it was made and you met the winemaker and you did all these things to kind of engage you with the wine, with the product that you're with the product. So
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of
And
things.
so, if you're able to establish that initial connection, do you have any advice for brands on how to maintain that connection over time?
Yeah, you need to make sure that you find some way to connect with that person socially, whether that's an email address or a phone, and or like follows and likes on whatever social media you're in, whether that's TikTok
Mm-hmm.
or Twitter or Instagram or Facebook, or depending
Mm-hmm.
on age range and how that person engages with their social media and their friends.
Yeah.
Um, that's going to be really super important to make sure that you're spending as much time engaging with them, but really in-person engagement as often as you can. So you get that person's email and then you let them know that you're going to be at this event and this event and this event.
Mm-hmm.
And while they're there, they can get your product, or, in between the event notifications, you say, hey, we're having a sale just for you. So you can buy our
Mm-hmm.
product online, that sort of thing. So you want to make sure that you're constantly engaging with that consumer, that core consumer, all the time, and make sure that you and try to have them spend time with you if you
Mm-hmm.
can at events that are interesting events for them. So if
Yeah.
you're going to be at if you're a sports oriented brand and you're going to be at a sporting event, you want to
Mm-hmm.
get your consumers there. So maybe you're giving away some tickets to that sporting event. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
you're having a thing nearby at a local bar, pub, restaurant, to engage with fans of that sport and of your brand.
Mm-hmm.
So those kinds of things are some ideas as to how to,
Yeah. So really,
engage
kind of
with folks. Go
thinking of
ahead.
your brand as lifestyle and how the
Oh,
two intertwine.
yeah. There's got to be a connection between your brand, that person, and something that's important in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And whatever that thing is the
Yeah.
connection that has to be made. So that's kind of the key piece of the whole process, is
Yeah.
making sure that those things are connected frequently,
Right.
by you and your marketing team.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Definitely, as your brand is getting out there, you have your initial product maybe you're launching with, and then you're doing product expansions, tying that into the communications is critical for the success of the future products on the shelf. as well.
Absolutely. People want to know what you're up to. They want to see what you're doing, and they want to engage with you, the founder,
Hmm.
and they want to engage with your brand. So if you're launching a new product or a new flavor, let folks know, and let
Hmm.
folks know where they can get it and where they can try it, and how how it circle ties back into your original premise, whatever that is.
Hmm.
Whatever the original premise of the brand is, you want to make sure that everything you expand with ties into the original premise. So
Yeah.
if you're producing things that are fruit flavored and all of a sudden you decide to produce a coffee flavored thing,
Yeah.
might not be on brand, it might not be
Hmm.
on trend. So think about launching the coffee flavored thing as an entirely different product or an entirely different brand,
Hmm. Yeah.
because you now may engage a whole new set of folks.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
If that makes sense, you know.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And so, like, as you're kind of walking through all this, it's making me think, how much is the social proof that you're able to build from a brand do retailers pay attention to? That maybe you don't have the all of the markets you wish to have yet, but you've just kind of really knocked it out of the park with your social media presence. Do they care? How much do they care?
They Retailers are a jaded bunch.
Yeah.
And no, seriously. And
Yeah.
retail space is real estate. And
Mm-hmm.
so for your product to go on the shelf, something else comes out or
Mm-hmm.
something else loses space that it had
Sure.
before. And if that thing was selling, then you're taking space from something that actually sold
Yeah.
yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how you have to think about that piece. What retailers want is they want to sell stuff. It's
Yeah.
kind of silly, but they want to sell
Imagine.
things, yeah, and they want to have people requesting that thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if 10 people come into a store and say, "Hey, where's Leah's wine?"
Mm-hmm.
then it's going to look good for you and your brand if 10 people come in and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
where's Leah's wine?" Whether it's on, and if it's on the shelf and they can sell it that day, that's a
Mm-hmm.
100% knock it out of the park win for the brand.
Yeah.
Um, and so that's why developing the community is so important, because
Mm-hmm.
those folks are going to go to the store, ask for your brand, and then the store is going to be like, "Hey, people keep asking for this brand. Maybe we should stock more of it."
Yeah.
And that's kind of the play of what you want to do,
Right.
in
So get
terms of,
your advocates out there asking for your product.
yes,
Say your name in retail stores, and that's going to help expedite your
your
process.
socials only matter if they lead to sales. I
Yeah.
guess would be the
Mm-hmm.
short version of that whole
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a great
explanation.
perspective. And it's so different, like in the book publishing industry, where a lot of authors won't get picked up if they don't have their own social following. They want to kind of leverage it. The publishers want to leverage a following. So interesting to see how in food and beverage it differs. Um, so I want to
Well, I
ask
think
you. Yeah, go ahead.
I would
Yeah.
say the publishers probably want to sell books. So if they have a whole new
Yeah.
set of people that they can sell more books to,
Yeah.
hey, you like
Mm-hmm.
this you like Leah's book? Great. You
Mm-hmm.
might like Joe's book too. And that's, another
Mm-hmm.
potential sale. But I
Yeah.
totally see having a following is great, but that following needs to be engaged and motivated to do something about your brand.
Yeah. Take action.
Yeah.
Uh, so, looking at the beverage industry now, what are some trends that you see that are emerging in the space that we'll see through the rest of this year into next year?
Wow. Okay. So there's a lot.
Yeah.
I would say we're definitely seeing a still a slight rise of ready to serve products, which means canned
Hmm.
beverages and ready to serve drinks, in bottles, multi
Yep.
serve. But that is starting to level off, and you will probably see a whole bunch. You'll probably see a consolidation within the industry around that, where some of the smaller players who just aren't making it will not
Mm-hmm.
make it. They
Yeah.
just won't they just won't make it. So we're going to see kind of um, a slowing down of the introduction of new products, and the established brands kind of keeping their foothold and taking more share.
Yeah.
We're seeing not declines, but certainly a flattening on whiskey and tequila. You're seeing that those products, which have been hot for the past maybe 5 to 10 years, are going to kind of slow and flatten out a little bit.
Yep.
And then, of course, we've seen wine, standard table wine, go right in the hopper, and really tank. And that's because most people do not want to be their parents, and the category is extraordinarily complicated to shop. So wine has kind of shot itself in the foot by being exclusive and snooty about how it's been marketed in the past. And that means that folks who are looking to simplify or find a wine easily are struggling to deal with it. So it's like, do I want to try to figure out which wine I want, or do I just want to get a bottled margarita? And so, because I know it's in a margarita, I'm probably going to get that because it's easier.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of where the trends are. We've seen a lot about lower ABV, no ABV, and lower calorie. And I think that continues to grow. However, I think it's hard for folks to justify the purchase of a $40 bottle of non-alcoholic gin. I have a hard time with that one. And I think we're going to see, you'll see that category grow. I'm not quite sure how it's going to shake out. It may grow more in the ready to serve area, more so than the non-alc spirits area. I would love to see more growth in Amaros and aperitifs and things of that nature, like Aperol kind of stuff. Yay, if that happens, because that's interesting beverage.
Yeah.
I think that there's a huge market for adult-based beverages, kind of like non-alcoholic soda kind of things, but that aren't priced like a cocktail. So, I don't want to pay $15 for a drink that's targeted to adults, but I would pay like $3 or $4, like a soda replacement.
Absolutely. I know that used to irk me so much when I was pregnant, and I would go out with my husband, and they have the mocktail menu. I'm like, why is this still $15 for a mocktail cocktail here? So
yes.
So
that's kind of that's a space worthy of growing. Also, all the things with nutraceuticals, which would be like mushrooms and different vitamins and things of that nature, are certainly going to continue to grow. We'll see a lot more on that level. We may also see more with THC, D9, CBD. Those are all growing right now in terms of ready to serve products with those compounds in them. That space is going to have to shake out a bit, though, because it's tough to tell what is the main driver for that category set. So if you're looking at THC beverages, for example, is it like, is 10% the right level? Is 25% the right level? Is 50% the right?
Yeah.
So that's the hard part with that, is like, what's the main driver for that sort of thing. So I think we'll see more growth, more experimentation in that category, people trying to figure it out. I think that there's a lot of space. There's a lot of white space in there.
Yeah.
Although regulation has been making that space complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, a lot to, especially in the latter there is a lot to navigate. But that was a fantastic summary of what all the trends are. So thank you. I love it.
Sure.
A lot to think about. All right. So the last question I ask all of our guests, and I can't wait to hear your answer, but what has been your recipe to revenue?
I would say that the recipe to revenue is surrounding yourself with folks who are smarter than you and can help you fill in the gaps of your knowledge set. I would say that that's critical for doing any kind of project, whether you're working in a company or you're working as an entrepreneur or you're
Mm-hmm.
working in a small group, it's always key to be able to bring in folks who know more stuff about a subject than you do
Yeah.
and have them be willing to help you out. And most people are like, never be
Yeah.
afraid to ask. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people are afraid to ask for help. They're afraid to ask because they don't want to feel silly or they don't want to
Mm-hmm.
feel like they're showing weakness, for example. But it's not weak to
Right.
not know something. If you don't know something, great.
Yeah.
Go find the folks who do know that thing, and they
Mm-hmm.
will probably help you out. Frequently for no money. like frequently enough, they will help you out without charging you. And so there's tons of resources out there for folks to get help, whether it's Google, whether it's AI, uh, um, um,
Mm-hmm.
devices, or it's other folks. And finding other folks in a given industry is not hard.
Yeah.
Folks are pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. Folks are pretty easy to find in other spaces. And so there are lots of resources out there. So
Yeah.
use those resources to your advantage, use those resources to fill your knowledge gaps and help yourself gain more. As I said, I knew nothing about logistics. So,
Yeah.
and now I know way more than I wanted to.
Yeah. And it can advise other folks where to head. But you don't have to be the smartest person in the room. You just have to bring the best tasting beverage.
That helps to get the other
Yeah.
people to start talking.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for all of your advice today and for sharing your story throughout your career. I know that it's so helpful for everybody to hear, and just the different paths that you could take to get to success. And I love your thoughts on who to bring in to make sure that you're successful. So thank you, AT, for joining me today on Recipe to Revenue. Just let us know where people can find you. What's the best place if
Yep.
they do want to get some help launching their product?
Yeah, the best place to find me is at www.elevatebeverage.com. And
Excellent.
that lists out all of our services. It gives you a way to get in touch with us. And it's not just me. I have a whole bunch of partners, because I'm not always the smartest person in the room, who are specialists in different parts of the industry. So
Yeah.
they help me out a lot in terms of getting projects done and getting people
Yeah.
on the way to building their brands.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thanks again. It was great to chat today. We'll
Thanks,
talk
Leah.
soon.
Bye bye.
Okay. Bye.